All right, in this video, we are going to be learning about the communication process. Communication is something that we have all been doing from the moment that we were born, and yet it is something that is far more complicated than most people realize. The majority of issues that happen in a workplace and in a relationship or in a home come from ineffective communication. And so hopefully through this lesson today, we're going to learn the terminology around it, but we're also going to understand the dynamics of it and things that we can do to make sure that our communication in a workplace or at home in a relationship are going to be as effective as possible. All right, so the communication process is the process of sending and receiving symbols with meanings attached to them. And yes, we say symbols because letters and words and the way that we define communication are just symbols, okay? Again, the communication process is when we want to get one message from ourselves to another person. And that seems really, really simple, but it is more complicated, as I said. And so we use this image to represent it, and we're going to dive deeper into that in just a minute. But before we get started, okay, let's talk about what our actual goal is. Because for us to be able to communicate what we would call effectively, we have to know what that is. Okay, and so generally when we are communicating, we say we have two goals. The first one is that it is effective, and for something to be effective, it means it needs to have worked. So the sender's message is fully understood by the receiver. So whatever it is I'm trying to communicate is what the receiver gets. But on top of that, we also generally are looking for efficient communication. And efficient is a terminology that means that we are doing it as quickly and at a lower cost than other options. All right. So an example that I have is as a teacher, okay, if my only goal was to effectively teach each of the students in my classroom a concept, then I would sit down with each and every one of those students on a one-on-one and teach them individually and respond to their needs to make sure that they fully understand what we are talking about. Unfortunately, that is not efficient. That is at a huge cost because time is money in the business world, and that would take a huge amount of time. And that is why teachers and education systems, i.e. the business of teaching, have created all these other ways for us to teach and learn. Like, for example, me making this video and you observing it, because the time it's taking is just me doing the lesson once. Similarly to in a classroom where I am doing the lesson one time and 30 students are getting that explanation. Is it fully effective for every single student in that room? Generally not. Me being able to work with them one-on-one to make sure that they fully understand it would be more effective. However, is there a way that I can do it to everybody, maybe giving multiple examples and using multiple visuals as we go, that everybody would get it, but we would get it at the least amount of costs that's associated with it. All right, so we're going to keep that in mind as we go. All right, so the very first thing when we are looking at communicating is we have to make a choice about what channel we're going to use to communicate. And generally we think of that as how we're going to communicate. Okay, so you have a choice. Anytime that I want to communicate something to somebody else, whether it's at work or whether it's in my personal life, I have a choice. Am I going to go up to them and talk to them and use words? That is a channel of communication. Am I going to call them on the phone and use words? That is a channel of spoken communication. Am I going to send a text message? That is a channel of written communication. Am I going to send an email? Am I going to write them a letter and put it in the mailbox and send it to them? Okay, these are choices that I get to make. And these are things that you have been doing most of your life and you continue to do it, probably without a lot of conscious thought about what you are doing. Because we communicate constantly in our lives, okay? But there is thought going into it. There is a reason that you talk to some people and you text some people and you DM some people and you email some people. And there is a reason why you choose different ones for different people. In the world of business, we divide them out into two categories. The first one being written communication. Okay. Again, anything that is written down, whether that is written electronically in an email or a DM or a chat message or a text message, or whether that is written down on paper. Okay, or a spoken channel where we are going to use a voice to communicate that. And again, that could be in person, or that could be over a phone, or that could be over a recording like this one. Okay, or a combination of both, like what's happening right now, where there are words that are written down that I am sending to you, but there is also my words explaining them in a more complex way. So we are going to do a quick little activity to get us used to how we're going to make the choice between communication methods. So for this one, I have picked 2 written communications, email and a text message, and I have picked 2 verbal communications over the phone or in person. These are going to be professional environments because that is the focus of our course, is professional communication, although a lot of these things are going to apply in our real lives. Okay, when are we going to choose a written format? We are going to choose a written format when there is lots of information that we need to get across to someone, because our human brains, when something is said to us, are not perfect. Our memory is not perfect. And so generally, if there's going to be numbers, if there's going to be details, if there's going to be things for the future that we're going to struggle to remember, we want to make sure we put it down in a written format so that somebody can look back at it and find that information later. When are we going to choose a voice format? Generally when there is emotional things involved with it, because we need to be able to have tone either in person or over the phone to be able to help make sure this person understands what we are saying. Difficult conversations, even happy conversations, as well as ones that need to be done quickly. Okay. The things to remember: emails. Okay, people have 2 to 4 business days to respond to them. A lot of people, it's evolving now. We're going closer to 1 to 2 business days. There was just legislation put in that teachers have to respond to parents within 2 business days, 48 hours. Okay, but they have time to answer. It's not going to be immediate. Generally, text messages people believe to be more immediate. Okay, however, generally in a business setting, we're not going to be texting with people who are above us, or necessarily even people who are or about business things specifically. That's generally more of a more personal communication method. Okay, phone is going to be more efficient than getting up and finding the person, okay, especially if they are far away. However, we do not have body language when we are doing that. So if it's more sensitive topics, the voice helps, but if we need that body language, we're going to choose in person. So the first one we're going to look at here, you need to share the address and time for a meeting with a colleague, and the meeting is in 2 days. Okay, we are giving them details about an address of where they need to go for 2 days from now. Which one are you choosing? Okay, and again, the key here is that you're going to explain yourself using these concepts that we have just talked about. Hopefully, you have chosen an email. Okay. An address has lots of details. It has a number, it has a street, it has a city, okay? So those are going to be details that we need, and we need them in the future. Our memories are not great, so we are going to want a written communication. Definitely it should be a written communication, okay? And then again, because we are in a professional work environment, we are going to be using our work email to send that information over. The other great reason that that would be in an email is that, again, most people on their devices are then just going to be able to click on that address and put it into a navigation system that's going to help them get to it. So that would be the one that we would prefer. All right. Next, you are unsure what to do next on a project that your boss has assigned to you. Okay, some key things about this is that if you are unsure of what to do next, if you do not get an answer right away, you're going to be sitting there doing nothing. So which type of communication gets us an answer faster? That's going to be spoken communication. Again, emails, they have up to 2 business days. Even text messages, again, not super professional, and we are messaging our boss, so we're not going to choose that. So we are going to choose to either do phone or in person. I would highly suggest that if it is at all possible that we would do in person, but it's going to depend how you're working. If you are working from home and they are working from home, then yeah, you're going to have to pick up the phone and call them, because it doesn't make sense for you to get in a car and drive them. However, if they are just like 3 cubicles down or in the office down the hall, then you're going to stand up and you're going to go talk to them, because you're going to be able to use that verbal to ask your questions, to get feedback, to ask more questions. Okay, generally, anytime that you need help with something, it's best to do that in a spoken way, because you're going to be able to go back and forth a bunch of times very quickly. And that's going to be the most efficient way that we're going to communicate. All right, next. You are planning a staff event, really any sort of event, meeting, and you need to know which days work best for each person. Which one are you going to choose for this? So again, think about how quickly you need the information back. Let's assume that the event isn't going to be for a few months. Okay, and we also want to be efficient with our time. So again, we need to make sure our explanation is what's going to be the best. Okay, so a lot of times people are going to do this via email. Okay, I'm going to send one email to everybody. Okay, that is efficient with my time. And I'm probably going to give them options. Okay, and they are going to reply, each of them, to me when they have time to let me know which options are best for them. Okay, it's not a complex thing. It's just which days work for you if it's worded well. Sometimes there's even softwares now that you can put this information out at in a written form, and they're able to effectively understand what I'm asking and answer without there being conversation and tone and body language and anything like that. Okay, in a perfect world, some people would like to go and chat with everybody, but that's going to take a lot of time. That's not going to be very efficient with our time. So a written version is likely going to be best. Okay, and when we talk about email etiquette, we'll talk about how we actually go about answering that email that went out to lots of people so that we don't bother everybody. All right. Next, you have completed a report and you would like a colleague to review it and give you feedback. Okay, hopefully we know that this is effective. You should never, ever, ever be sending in a report or a document to your boss, just like you would never send it to your teacher, having your eyes be the only ones that are on it. You always want someone else to double check it, to do an extra spelling, grammar check, content check, etc., etc. So you have this big written document and you want someone else to look at it. How are you going to send it? Okay. Hopefully it's fairly obvious that this needs to be sent via email. It is a written document, so they need to be able to look at it. You're not going to call them and read the whole thing to them. That's not an efficient use of their time. Okay. You could print it and take it to them in person, but again, you would probably need to leave and give them some time to look at it. So email is probably going to be our most effective version of it. Okay. You may want to give them the option to call and give you the feedback instead of writing the feedback back, but that's a separate type of communication that's happening afterwards. That initial ask could be done via email, and it often is. All right, finally, you are needing a colleague to share a professional contact with you. So for example, a colleague of mine has been dealing with one of our customers, our clients, and they're going on vacation. And I'm like, hey, can you just shoot over that contact's information, their phone number, their address, the details of their account? How are you going to get that information from them? Well, it's really, really going to depend, and it's going to depend on the time sensitivity of it. Okay, if we need it right away, then we need to do verbal communication, at least for the ask. Okay, I'm going to call them or I'm going to go find them in person and be like, I need this information right now. Can you please send it? They will likely choose to send it in a written format, whether that's a text message or an email, because it is lots of numbers and lots of information. But that is their choice of a separate form of communication in answering you. In this initial one, if it's urgent, then we're going to do it verbally. If it's not as urgent, then you could choose to do it in an email. All right. So hopefully we got there and a lot of that was making sense on the channel that we are choosing. Oh, one last one for my students here. You need to let me know as your teacher or any teacher or professor that you're not going to be able to meet a deadline. Obviously, this is happening in advance of the deadline, not the night before, and there is a very valid reason for it. How are you going to let them know and ask them for an extension? Okay. Ideally, you're going to do this in person. Okay. This is involving a big ask. We want tone and body language to be there. We are the ones that are letting somebody down and are not able to do something. And so ideally, we are doing this in person. If, however, you are highly contagious and you are not able to be around that person in person, you could also do this through a professional email. But remember, 2 business days. Business days do not include the weekend. So we need to expect that that teacher, when we send it as an email, will have 2 business days before the due date to get back to us about if it's okay to extend a due date. So if it is more urgent than that, if there isn't that much time, if your anxiety is going to stress about not being able to get a response within an hour or 2, then you need to pick up the phone or go find them in person or send somebody else in person to have that conversation with them. All right. As a teacher, I get emails all the time about an hour after I got a first email asking me to please respond to that email. That is not professional behavior. Okay, people have 1 to 2 business days to get back to you on an email. And if it's any more urgent than that, you need to pick up a phone or you need to find that person in person. All right, and that's going to do you well as you continue through your education, especially into post-secondary. All right, and finally, there is an emergency that you need to get help as soon as possible. Time sensitive. I really hope you're not sending an email to the fire department that there is a fire, okay? We need to get help, so we need to do it fast. And whichever is faster, making a phone call or running, okay, we're going to make that happen. All right, so what we have just talked about is the channel. You can literally think of it as a tube. Which tube have you chosen to take the message from the sender and send it to the person that you are sending it through to? Okay, are you going to send it as an email? Are you going to do it as a phone call? Are you going to do it verbally talking? Are you going to do it as a text message? Are you going to do it as sign language? Are you going to engrave it on the side of a stone, etc., etc.? Okay, right now we are going to now go back to the first step. A lot of people think that this is the second step, but personally, the way that I, as a sender, choose to encode my message is going to depend on the channel that I'm sending it. So the decision making in our brain, whether you've consciously done it or not, goes in the order of which channel first, and then how you're going to encode the message. And that's why we're teaching it that way. So we have our channel and we are now going to go about encoding our message. Encoding a message is choosing how you are going to go about communicating what is in your brain and you want them to know to them. Okay. And that sounds really, really obvious, but believe it or not, people do it differently. So these are going to be which words or symbols or body language we are going to use to get the message to somebody else. So the example that I often do in class is that I ask students, okay, if you are really, really hungry and you want to ask your bestie to go get food with you, you want to ask a friend, you want to ask a boyfriend, girlfriend, you want to ask your bestie, do you want to get food? Do you want to get dinner with me tonight? You are hungry and you want to go eat. How are you going to do that? Okay. First, most of my students told me that it's going to be through a direct message or a text message. Totally fine. Let's assume that that's the channel that you're choosing. Now I want to know, what is the message? What is the thing that is written down? Okay. And it's often different for everybody. Okay, I have had students, I literally made them write it down. Okay, and you could do that right now if you want. Pause it and write it down and then look at the people around you. Okay, I had students who literally sent like 3 emojis. That's it. Totally visuals. Okay, and apparently the person they are sending it to would understand what that means. Okay, I had some people that literally wrote, I'm trying to remember what it was. At my one school, it was DOMS, capital, well, they didn't put capitals, DOMS question mark. And when I looked at that, I was like, I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what the message that you are trying to send is. That is not a good encoded message if it's coming to me. But according to them, like half the class knew what that was. I guess it was the shorthanded name for a restaurant that they go to, and they know that by asking that, it means that they want to go out for food because they want to go to that restaurant. And that makes logical sense. So that's how they've chosen to encode the message. I then would often ask my students if that message would be different if they were asking a parent to go get food with them. Okay, and most of them said yes. And again, you could pause and write down what that would be. Okay, generally when they were asking their parents, it was more of a question. Can we go for dinner tonight? It wasn't specifically about our restaurant. It was something about wanting to eat. Okay. And so that shows you that you are already doing this. You are encoding the message. You as the person know which channel you're using, and you are choosing how you are going to ask that. Okay. And when I talk about it being words or symbols, that's generally for written down communication. Okay. For a verbal communication, that is also going to be the words, but it's also going to be how they're said and what your body looks like. Okay. My husband jokes that when I don't feel like cooking, I will often say to him, "Oh, what do you want for dinner tonight?" And I do it that way, and it's very different. And he knows that that's my body language code for saying, I want to go out for food tonight. I don't want to cook anything. Okay. Or I will say, what are you cooking us for dinner tonight? Okay. Which is different than asking what he would like me to make for dinner tonight. Okay. And so that is giving more messages than just the words themselves. All right. So we have chosen our channel. We have encoded our message. Okay. We've now taken that encoded message. We've sent the email. We've sent the text. We've said the words. We've made the phone call. And as that encoded message is trying to get to the receiver, it's trying to get to the other person, there is a whole bunch of stuff that could get in the way. Okay. And that stuff that could get in the way is what we call noise. Okay. You may have picked the perfect channel. You may have written a message they will understand, but as you send it to them, as that message is trying to get to the receiver, something could happen that gets in the way. Okay. And we're going to look at the 4 main ones that we see happening in the business world through the majority of our conversations. Okay. The first one is an actual physical barrier to that communication. Okay. So think of trying to yell a message to somebody across a really loud room. Okay. If there is physical noise and you are using verbal communication, they may literally not hear you. Okay. If you're giving a presentation and the visuals are really important, if there's a column in the room or somebody's sitting in a place that they can't see, okay. Or somebody's eyesight is not very good and they're very far away. Somebody's hearing isn't very good. And you're not being loud enough. Okay. Or somebody is distracted. Okay. So I often joke that I am bad at communication when I am at home because my children are constant noise, whether they're being loud or not. I might see that I have a text message from my husband or from somebody, or I have an email from a student. And as I'm in the process of going to open it, something chaotic happens. A child jumps on my lap, somebody needs my phone, something spills, something breaks, I get distracted. And so I never actually get to see that message. All right, so those would all be physical distractions. The next one would be that the channel was chosen wrong. Okay, and so in that process of sending that message doesn't fully get to me because something is missing. Okay, if you are sending something that could come off as being hypercritical, okay, sending it with writing is going to mean that the person may interpret it wrong. Okay. If you are giving me lots and lots of details over the phone, my brain is going to tune out and not remember them. Okay. And so that is noise that's making your message not fully get to me. Okay. Like I said, getting that email and not opening it for 2 days because I know I have 2 days to open it, and then realizing, oops, that was something that was more urgent and I didn't get the message. Okay. So that is an improper channel can create noise for us. All right. Next is that if you get no feedback after the message gets to the person, we don't know if they got the right message. Okay. And so again, in things like emails, we don't get to see the person hearing it. We don't always get a response, an immediate response back from them in the form of body language. And so we may not know that they got the message wrong. Okay, there may have been noise, there may have been an improper channel or something like that, but we wouldn't know about it unless we're able to get some feedback from the person. Okay, the next one is a psychological concept called status effect. Okay, and so when the sender and receiver have different statuses, and again, status is very much a perceived status. Okay, so generally when people are trying to communicate and they maybe in a business world have a lower job and they're trying to communicate with the CEO or the boss of the business or the owner of the organization, status effect could come into play both ways. Okay, so somebody in a lower position may be very, very nervous and may not fully explain themselves when they're talking to the boss because they're worried about offending them. Or in reverse, somebody that is in a higher status or what they believe to be a higher status may not give the message that is coming from somebody at a lower as much attention as is needed, because they don't believe it to be as important. Okay, the other thing that can happen with status effect is the terminology that's used. Okay, if you're using very business specific terminology with somebody that is not familiar with that, then they're not going to understand. When you were encoding it, they're not going to understand what was said. All right. And then also cultural differences. Okay. Culture plays a lot of a role in how we communicate and what words and concepts mean to us. Okay. And again, culture comes from the way you were raised, the family you were in, the environment you were in. It can come from religion. It can come from a lot of things. Okay. So even though we speak English, okay, for example, I recently had a born house for my child. Okay. And for most of you, you have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, this is a cultural word. This is a cultural celebration that you may have no context of. But when I send out an invitation, simply saying it's a born house is enough information to tell the people that are coming exactly what they need to bring with them. They would know that they need to bring US dollar bills that are $1, lots of them. They would know they have to bring baby powder. Okay, they would know they need to bring food. Okay, but for somebody not in the culture, that word won't necessarily mean anything to them. Okay, another example would be the concept of time. Okay, if you grew up in certain cultures in Canada, if somebody said a party started at 4 p.m., when are you arriving? Okay, and I now want you to share that with the people around you and see if you all have the same answer. And then what if your work started at 4 p.m. as opposed to a party? Would you arrive at the same time or a different time? Okay. Different cultures have different expectations of time. And so much to the point that when we were having a gathering, the Cameroon side of my family were given a different time on their invitation than the white Canadian side of my family. Okay. We wanted everybody to be there at 7 o'clock. Okay, and we told the Cameroonian side that they should come at 4. And we told my families that they should come at 7. Some of them I told 7:30 because they're always early. Okay, so their understanding of time for a party is different, okay, of when you show up and what that means. Okay, and in some cultures, parties and workplaces are very different things. Okay, so again, when you are encoding that message, what the implied meaning of that is could be affected by our culture and the culture of the people that you are speaking with. Okay, and I'm sure some of you can understand this. Time one, you have that friend who maybe you give a different time to because they're always later, they're always early, and so you take that into consideration when you are communicating with them. Okay, and this can come out in all sorts of things, whether it's time, whether it's how we expect people to dress, whether it's what we expect people to bring. Okay, you don't want to assume that everybody has the same cultural understanding of what these things are. And as a kindness, please, in the workplace, especially when you have newer employees that have never been to an event like this before, just be clear and list it out. Because if they knew already, that doesn't offend them. And if they didn't, then you've made it a little bit easier for them. All right, so being aware of the types of noise that can get involved, okay, means that we're likely to be a better communicator because we can make sure that we have set ourselves up for success. If I am speaking with somebody, okay, I have made sure that they can hear me. Maybe I confirm that at the beginning of the conversation so that we're not going to have that noise, okay? If I am using specific terminology, I'm going to confirm that that person knows what that means, or maybe I'm going to define those words like I do in these lessons, all right? So if we've chosen the proper channel, we encoded the message properly, we sent it along, we made sure it got through all those noise barriers, it's finally gotten to the person at the other end. It's finally gotten to the receiver. Guys, this is like a lot of work for just a, do you want to go out for dinner tonight? Okay. When it gets to that other person, they then have to decode the meaning, because again, we don't often actually say what we mean. Okay. Because when I say, do you want to go out for dinner tonight? That could mean I'm hungry and I want to eat. That could mean I'm lonely. That could mean I haven't seen you in a while and I want to see you. That could mean I don't have any money left. Will you please buy me dinner? That could mean a lot of things. There's a lot of messages that I could be sending with that same communication. All right. So what that person needs to do now is they need to decode the message. Okay. And remember that even if there was no noise, even if we picked the right channel, okay, that the perceptions used by the receiver could break down our communication. They could perceive the message that you sent to mean something different. Okay. How does that happen? Okay. First of all, it can happen by stereotypes. Okay. Stereotypes, if you're not familiar with the word, are widely held oversimplifications that we believe about groups of people. Okay. And so stereotypes or bias are very, very normal. If you study brain science, it's actually a survival technique of our brain. It's going to happen. You don't have to feel bad for having stereotypes. Okay. But it's when we actually let them make an impact that then there's going to be a problem. Okay. So if I have a stereotype from growing up that men are strong, okay, that might be a stereotype that I have from when I was growing up because society taught me that. Okay, that can exist in my brain. That's not a problem. But if when somebody communicates to me, that stereotype gets put on their message, which makes me interpret it differently, that could be a problem. Okay, so for example, the stereotype that my brain tells me is that men are strong, and then that equates to men thinking that I'm weak. So when somebody like my husband says, don't worry, babe, I've got that for you. Okay. Or I'm at work and a man offers to help me carry something. That stereotype in my brain hears, let me help you, as an insult. And so that person who was offering me help and maybe would have offered that help to any human being that was walking along and maybe honestly meant to communicate, let me help you, this is a two-person job. My stereotypes and my perception of that has come across as you're incapable because you are a woman. And some of you will say that's a me problem, and I get that. But that's what we were talking about with communication. That you may have chosen the proper channel, you may have made sure there was no noise, and still your message can come across inaccurately. Okay? And people have stereotypes about all sorts of things. Gender is big in the world right now, but there's lots of them. Okay. I had a friend who was having this scenario at work when she would set a clear deadline as having to leave at a certain time. Her coworkers didn't seem to take it as seriously as other coworkers because she was single and didn't have children. And so they were like, oh, well, like you can be the one to work late tonight. And she's like, well, no, I told you I have to leave at 5 because I have, I don't know, an appointment, whatever it is that she has. But for whatever reason, their stereotype of somebody without children altered their understanding of her message and how set in stone that time was. Okay. So that could have an influence on it. The next one is a psychological concept called the halo effect. And the halo effect is interesting because business people, actually marketers, use it all of the time. Okay. But this is actually a psychological effect where our brain looks at a person or a thing, and they use our assessment of them in one area of their life to influences the decision they make about them in other areas of their life. Okay. In essence, it is a biased opinion, but it's not biased based off of a stereotype. It's a bias based off of that individual person. Okay. So for example, some students believe that teachers think that well-behaved students are smart. Okay. And that is an honest halo effect that can happen. And most good teachers are fully aware of that. And that is why we mark without having students' names shown to us. Okay. One area of how we know this person, they are well behaved, they hand things in on time, equals good in our brain. And so we assume that they're going to be good at all the other things that they do. Okay, this is really, like I said, in marketing, we see celebrities that are really good golfers. So we assume they're really good parents. We see celebrities who are really good singers. And so we assume that whatever they eat, we should also eat. Okay, our brain is trying to simplify its work by making those connections. Good in one thing we care about equals good in another thing. Or in reverse, bad in one thing we care about means bad in another thing. Okay, it's very difficult to train our brains when there is somebody that we don't like. Okay, when there is somebody that has done something that has harmed us, that has a belief system that is different than ours, that seems to be bad in people's eyes, could be good at something else. Okay, and one of the examples that I often give when we talk about leadership is actually Hitler. Okay, and I know that that can be really triggering for a lot of people. Okay, because yeah, lots of things about Hitler are horrendous and terrible. Okay, and so our brain creates this halo effect, bad, put them in the bad box. But in reality, he was really, really good at convincing people to do the things that he wanted to, which is the definition of a leader. Okay, we don't agree with what he asked them to do, but just because somebody is bad or we disagree with them on one thing doesn't mean that they can't be good. And just because somebody is good at one thing doesn't mean that they might be doing something else wrong. Okay, but our brain's natural process of making those connections for us is something that can affect what we are hearing from somebody else and can affect communication that we have with them. Okay, I might have interacted with somebody and really found them to be really lovely and kind and this, that, or the other thing. And so when I communicate them, maybe I am assuming that they're going to decode messages in a certain way. They're going to have certain political beliefs. They're going to have certain other things that I equate with that. And in fact, they're going to decode them differently than what my brain told me about this person. All right, the next one is selective perception. Again, we're looking at a lot of psychology here because this is our brain's way of decoding messages. Okay, selective perception is, again, a very natural process. Kids get called out for it by their parents all the time. Okay, but it's the fact that our brain only notices and tends to fixate on certain stimulus. Okay, our brains are wired as a protective method to try to forget bad things quickly. Okay, this was first explained to me actually when I was pregnant with my first child, because I was walking around looking at everybody who'd ever had multiple kids being like, what is wrong with you? This is the worst thing in the world. Why would anybody ever do this again? And everybody said to me, you forget. And I was like, how am I going to forget? I am throwing up every single day. I am in so much pain. The birth thing, I'm not even going to talk about it. Okay, it was awful. Step one to step end. And I will publicly say that. Okay. And yet somehow 3 years later, I had another child. And I remember going into labor with my second child and looking at my husband and being like, how did I forget this was so bad? Okay. Our brains are wired to forget bad things. Okay. And to not notice as much. Okay, and so in society, people are often given advice about sandwiching bad news, putting something good at the beginning, then bad, then good at the end. And from a psychology perspective, that's actually not a great way to communicate, because often that criticism is the most important part that we want to communicate. And when we sandwich it with good news, our brains, as a way of protecting us, thank you, brain, okay, is going to focus more on the good and not so much on the negative. So if the main thing that we need to communicate is something that might be perceived as negative, hopefully it's being done in a constructive way, in a supportive way. That needs to be the message. That needs to be all that is included, so that is what the person is going to focus on. It can be done in a kind way, but we're not going to, as is my instinct and as many of us have been taught, to add on a compliment at the end, because in 5 days, I can guarantee that person's only going to remember the compliment and not the criticism. Okay, because we don't like discomfort and bad feelings. Okay, and then finally, we have projection. Again, okay, something that our brain does in order to try to protect us. Okay, our egos, our brains as human beings, okay, are constantly trying to protect us. And so things that we don't like about ourselves, we tend to be very hypercritical of in other people. Okay, and that is what projection is often seen as. So a great example here is that my father, throughout my childhood, hated how emotional I was. I'm a very emotional person. I cry on a dime. That is how I am. That is how I'm wired. Okay. He did not like that about me. And he didn't say he hated it, but he was very critical of it my whole life. Okay. Why? He is an incredibly emotional person. He won't admit it, but he is. Okay. And so again, as somebody that loves me, he's likely trying to protect me from the pain that he got from being a very emotional person. But it's also that ego of, I don't like seeing emotions in other people because I don't like that about myself. All right. And so our human body does this on many, many things, but generally either things we really like about ourselves, we are going to be more drawn to in others, or things we don't like about ourselves, we're likely going to be hypercritical of in others or be pushed off on. And these are the things that we often see. Projection comes out a lot in the hiring processes and in human resources, which we're going to be studying later on. But again, when we're receiving that message from somebody, okay, the way they go about doing it, even the way that they dress or talk or act, could be included in messing up the perceived meaning of what we're talking about. Okay? Because again, if I simply say, my son was very emotional today, my father is going to perceive that message as, my son has had a very bad day. Whereas I might have meant that message as, he was so excited because we took him to his birthday party and he was so emotional about it. Okay, and so that perceived meaning of my message by using the word emotional is going to come off different to that person because of their own projection. Okay. Also, we have the concept of semantics, which is that certain words can mean different things and their meaning can be distorted. So this is not even just like cultural words or industry specific words. It can also just be the way that we choose to put words together. So for example, most people I know will say, I bought a new car. Okay, when I say I bought a new car, what do you envision? Is it a brand new car or is it a new to me car? Okay, because if I got a new car, I've never bought a brand new car in my life. I've always bought new cars. And I use the saying, I got a new car, because I did get a new car. It's new to me. Okay, but it's not a brand new car. Okay, and so words can have different meanings to different people and in different scenarios. Okay, English is a tricky language. Okay, and so there's lots of things that can go wrong. All right, I know that was a long one, but that is the communication process, and knowing it and using it is really, really important. Okay, choosing the right channel, encoding the message correctly, knowing the way that the receiver is going to decode the message. I don't say to my father that my son had an emotional day. I say my son was very excited because I know about the way that he decodes it. Okay, and then trying to put up things in the way to make sure that the noise isn't going to get in the way, okay, are going to make us more effective communicators.